Hello and welcome. We are talking H-1B visas. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security has said that it will start accepting applications for extending the visas which are likely to now expire. Now, this is an important development considering that a lot of people were concerned, particularly information technology companies who have almost 75,000 IT workers sitting in the United States, Indian IT workers sitting in the United States. So the question now is, what does this delay or this acceptance of delay mean? Number one. Number two, what is happening to or what happens to company IT workers who are laid off? And that's really the concern, because the law says that if you're laid off, then you cannot stay for beyond 60 days. Now, a delay does help, but how does it help in the future? So let's find out from our two guests. Siddharth Pai, founder and managing director of Sienna Capital Management, also has been someone who's tracked and watched the Indian IT outsourcing and offshoring industry very carefully in the past. Purvi Chotani, managing partner at LawQuest, and an immigration attorney. Thank you both for joining us. So Purvi, let me start. So first question is really, tell us about the H-1B, just to refresh the minds of our viewers.
Right. So the H-1B is a temporary work visa program that is run in the United States since the 1990s, and they are generally capped at 65,000 for general applicants with a bachelor's degree, and an extra 20,000 for individuals who have a U.S. advanced degree. So that's basically the sum of it. And to qualify for this, they have to have a bachelor's degree which is relevant to the job. It has to be equivalent to a U.S. bachelor's degree, and the job should require a bachelor's degree. So it has to be both. Now, the current situation is such that many H-1B workers are being laid off, and they're being laid off either by the primary employer, who's the petitioner, because for every H-1B worker, you need a U.S. company that is the sponsor. We call it the petitioner. So the petitioner is either laying them off, or the petitioner has got contracts with what we call end clients. So that's the consumer of the IT services. That company is canceling projects, and hence these employees don't have any work to keep them busy. In such a situation, companies are faced with the dilemma of what to do with these employees. The H-1B worker is allowed to stay there for up to 3 years and can get extensions of 3 years. It's a total of 6 years, and in certain circumstances, it can go beyond that. However, as soon as an employee is terminated, he or she is out of H-1B status and should actually have to leave the country. Earlier, there was a 10-day grace period, but a few years ago, they introduced a 60-day grace period, during which an employee can find a new job or wrap up his affairs and leave the country.
Right, and the current extension that's been offered by the Department of Homeland Security allows?
So the extension has always been there. You can apply for extensions. What they have announced is that if there is a delay in applying the extension, they will condone the delay if the delay is commensurate to the circumstances. So, I mean, to put it in layman's terms, if a petition is expiring on April 30th and you should be filing the petition before April 30th for a timely filing, but instead of that, your petition reaches them on, let's say, April 5th or April 7th, they are going to condone that delay because of the COVID-19 situation. And yes, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
No, so that's why what they've done is they have indicated they will condone the delay, but that is also at the discretion of the officers. It's not a blanket condonation of delay.
Right, and that does not mean that you're in any way getting a reprieve for the job that you've lost.
Absolutely not. So there are two things happening over here. One is that it's a timely extension filed by the company. If that doesn't happen and the person is out of the job, then that person to remain in the United States beyond the 60-day period needs to apply for a change of status to a tourist visa, business visa as applicable, for example. That application also has to be filed within the 60-day grace period. Even there, if there is a delay, they will condone that delay based on the circumstances. So they have not given you any extra reprieve, except that they might be lenient for delays. That's all.
Right. Okay. Now, Sid, what's your sense on what's happening today or right now vis-a-vis Indian IT companies and their staff sitting in the United States?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked for Indian IT companies, because there is a difference between how the Indian IT companies have been treated in the last few years versus how companies that are of American origin but are active in India have been treated. So, for instance, if I were an American company applying for an H-1 visa for one of my Indian staff, the likelihood that that H-1 visa would get approved in the first place is significantly higher than if I were an Indian-based company that was also hired, had operations in the US and was looking to send somebody off on an H-1B visa. So the last few years, what's actually happened is that the amount of dependence that the Indian IT majors have had on the H-1 visa has decreased because they've learned that they've had to get by with either local hires or use specific people whom they're sure will get through the process. There's many of them are just rejected out of hand when they apply, even here in India. So there is a difference between the two. So I guess the majority of what we're talking about right now, 75,000 or so, who I believe are in the US at this point, very many of them actually work for American companies in the US, but are Indian citizens and have gone there on H-1 visas. So the extension that we're talking about applies more to them as just, but I don't think that extension or no extension, I think this economic problem has come to obviously everybody as a result of COVID, and that there will be a significant number of layoffs, whether you're an American company or an Indian company, and you're just going to have to deal with the circumstances.
Right. So in a situation like this, of course, this is not a situation that we've seen anything like before, but is an H-1B worker at a greater disadvantage compared to, let's say, someone else, considering that the H-1B worker was hired in the first place because he or she had skills which maybe a local resident did not?
See, it's difficult to, so this is where we're getting it. The simple answer to that question is yes. Because the burden of proof that somebody actually is coming in on an H-1 and has a capability that is significantly better than somebody in the US actually is something that shows up later on in the process. It shows up when they go through what's called a labor certification in preparation for their green card. That's when the company has to prove that there is no other individual, either a US citizen or a US permanent resident, a resident alien, who could take that job in place of that person with the H-1 who's looking for a green card. So that stringent test actually appears later on. It doesn't appear as stringent, it's not as stringent in the beginning when they first go there on an H-1 visa. And the US, by the way, has been using this program for very many years. It used to be that you actually had to study in the US, go on an F-1 or a J-1 visa. I'm dating myself, but anyway, and then apply hopefully for an H-1 which you got later on. I'm talking about the 80s. They relaxed the rules in the 90s, like ma'am was just saying, to allow for people with Indian degrees or other capabilities to apply directly and to be able to go without an American degree. Now, if you remember, about 10 years ago, there was a shortage of nurses in the US, and a whole host of Indian nurses got H-1B visas and the ability to move there because that country was looking to fill its shortage of nurses. Very many of them applied for a green card and have since stayed there. But that's an example. The country has used that H-1B program very, very judiciously in terms of looking for the kinds of resources that they want immigrating into their country. So all in, to answer your question, having an H-1 doesn't mean that you're going to have a better chance than a local citizen. Or a local permanent resident.
Right.
In fact, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Purva.
In fact, they are at more of a disadvantage in the current circumstances, because let's say a company wants to downsize and they want to, or they want to put some of their employees on furlough, that is leave without pay. They cannot do that for H-1B workers. They can do it for their US workers, that is green card holders or citizens, because the moment they put them in unproductive status and don't pay them a salary, then they're violating their obligations of an H-1B employer. The H-1B employer makes many attestations at the time of filing the H-1B petition on what is known as a labor condition application that is filed with the Department of Labor. And in that, they have to attest that this person is going to work X number of hours and for which he will get Y salary. Any violation of that can have stringent effect on the companies. They can be penalized, they can be monetary penalties, they can be barred from immigration programs like the H-1B and the green card. So the implications on the companies to get these individuals on a non-productive status for H-1B workers is humongously risky for the employer. For the employee, yes, the worst is they'll be out of a job, but the company could face more difficulty.
Right, but you're also saying, if I understood you right, that they will not put them into leave without pay, because putting them into leave without pay in effect is asking them to leave. So they would rather ask them to leave rather than put them into leave without pay. Or conversely, an Indian H-1B worker actually does not have that option, whereas a local resident might.
Actually, yes. So the local employees can, sort of engage in a negotiation and say, okay, we'll go for 2 months without pay, but keep our jobs safe for us when we come back. They can't do that with the H-1B workers. So the options the companies have is, one of the options is to reduce their work hours and file new H-1B applications for that, amendment applications, which is a onerous process. And then also you've got to be careful that the salary doesn't drop between your LCA obligations. And the second option they have is to terminate these employees and have them remain in the US for 60 days or till the flights are available to come back to India. But those two steps are really what is available to them. There are companies thinking of innovative ideas, but nobody has taken the decision because there is a lot of ifs and buts. If the Department of Labor comes and has an audit, what are we going to say?
Right. Sid, I think so. The $1,000,000 question is really this. So, what's the health? I know it's a very, very tough question, but what's the health of the companies who are typically hiring Indian IT workers onshore, and how does it look like right now?
So, following on from the last question that you asked, insofar as that they are true technical companies that are at the forefront of technology, meaning big tech, what we call big tech today. So the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, and the Facebooks of this world. I think they are at less of a disadvantage than IT services companies like an IBM or an Accenture or an Infosys or a Wipro or anybody else. I think what happens in an outsourced environment is it's easier to let off people who are not really part of your payroll. It's an easier thing to do in terms of cutting off staff. So there's a waterfall effect that will happen as a result. So if there's a reduction in an outsourced contract, and somebody who's working for an IBM or somebody who's working for an Accenture or an Infosys or a Wipro will likely be let go sooner. So as a result, we'll need to be the follow-on effect will be Wipro and Infosys or others wanting to bring them back to India. I think the ones who have worked for Google or Facebook or others are actually at less of a risk, just simply because for now at least, it appears as if the economic impact on those companies is slightly less than it would be for the other companies.
Right. Purvi, do we have any sense on what's the split and in how many visas and to whom? For instance, Sid was talking about nurses at one point of time, along with other categories. I mean, do you have any sense?
No, I don't have the data divided like that, but to give you an idea, the top 10 visa applicants for H-1B workers in the past several years have been IT companies, 7 of our top IT companies. So they're the biggest consumers. Right. This time in the online selection, which is a new process on the H-1B program, 67.7% of the registrants were Indian nationals. So that's the type of divide that we have. And most of them are engaged by the Indian IT companies who are service providers. And the difference between the service providers and the ones who have in-house projects, like a Facebook and Google, they use them in-house for their own projects, is that they're not dependent on an end client for the work. Because when IBM and Accenture are outsourcing, if the end client has a reduction in work, they get impacted. While Google and Facebook can sort of assign them to different projects within their office and still retain their talent.
Right, right. We're running out of time. Last questions to you both. Sid, I know all of this is finally dependent on the health of the economy and the IT industry in specific in the United States. But if you were to trace the path of onshoring versus offshoring, and of course, you already pointed out there is a certain caste system that's developed because the people who are in the Googles and Facebooks on Amazons of the world are likely to be more shielded and the others not. But if you were to look at it over time, how do you think, or where do you think we are in terms of, let's say, from an Indian IT industry point of view and its relative, let's say, strength in a position at a time like this?
So, I mean, there are a couple of points that I'd like to make there. One is, of course, the immediate impact. The immediate impact across the board, I think, will be fairly significant for both Indian IT companies as well as non-Indian IT outsourcing companies.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to face the ramifications of that. The longer term thing, however, that I've been screaming about from the rooftops for many years is the fact that many Indian IT service providers have not really recast themselves as global players and significant employers in the US or the UK or the other countries that they operate in. Many years ago, for instance, if you buy a Honda car in India or a Hyundai in India, it's made in India, right? Or a Toyota, it's made in India. So it's creating local employment. I don't think that the Indian majors have actually gone to the point where they've created enough employment in countries like the US and the UK. If you look at Accenture, for instance, they're supposed to have over 100,000 people in India, but they also have 80, 90,000, 100,000 people in the US. They're considered a balanced employer globally. So I think this is a big wake-up call for our Indian industry. Hopefully they'll become more global rather than Indian, operating internationally.
Right, right. And Purvi, any piece of advice for those who are stuck, likely to be stuck?
So the employees should be very alert. They should, of course, try to find a new job. But if that doesn't happen, they should be very, very alert about filing a change of status application before the end of 60 days, even if there are no flights. They should do that.
Right, right. Thank you both. This is, of course, a challenging time, and hopefully, the Indian IT industry will find its feet once again, as it seems to have always found. Thank you both for joining me.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.